Refill your coffees. Is everybody awake now? We're going to get into some serious business. We're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, GDPR. We've been talking about GDPR at this conference for the last couple of years. People have been anxious about its coming, wondering what it will mean, and now the laws are in effect and the rules are here. So we're going to talk about what it means, almost 1 year in, not quite, but what it means for marketers and how it's affecting the business. So let's start by introducing yourself and your company.
I was sent to learn the Data Protection Act, which was pre-GDPR. So when I joined the club, before GDPR, we did a complete review of how we handle data, and we aligned to the Direct Marketing Association best practice. So our approach from a consumer data collection standpoint was to do no pre-ticking of boxes and double opt-in, etc. So we weren't really at risk from a commercial standpoint going into GDPR, but obviously GDPR is far-reaching and it's not just about the use of consumer data. So from a club perspective, we had to do a complete audit and understand where data was being collected across both the commercial side of the business, where all of our revenue generation happens, and then the footballing side, so where all of the player data, the youth data. And I think we did, the audit took us we started 18 months before GDPR came in, and that took us probably majority of that time, and I think we found over 800 different types of data that we were collecting in different locations, in different formats, from pieces of paper all the way through to structured data sets. So that was the approach that we took to identify those, and then obviously the legal department and our IT department, which led the program, they ended up having to do a DPIA, Data Protection Impact Assessment, for every source, so all 800 sources, and then an action plan around how they would then deal with them. Mm-hmm. So that was what we did.
So I don't think we were quite as thorough as Arsenal, to be honest. So we're a B2B company, so we don't really send newsletters. When we have kind of incidents, so we had a visa service out, or opted into email or not. So we kind of rely on the fact that we don't send newsletters as such. We worked very closely just to make sure that we're sending information that we can send based on the other kind of reasons to talk to someone. So whether it's contractual, whether it's... so we don't really use consent for our email marketing because it just isn't applicable to what we're doing. So for us, it wasn't actually that much of an issue. Bring the data for our customers, how are we capturing data on the websites, how are we using that data in terms of our remarketing activities and things like that. So for email, it wasn't that much of an issue, but throughout the business, it was quite a challenge.
Did it hurt your email lists, either one of you? Maybe not, Jacques.
For us, no. I think I resonate with what was said yesterday, actually. I think GDPR has had quite a bad press for it being about the fines, and actually when you strip back and you get closer to the detail, it's about empowering the consumer. Mm-hmm. And basically it's about, if you've got a relationship built on trust, so you're collecting data in the right way, and you're engaging with your audience in the right way and utilising your technology platforms, as we've just heard, actually it's an opportunity, and we very much treat it as an opportunity. We're well known for being quite a conservative organisation, and what we used to do was have about 3 opt-ins on everything we collected. So rather than just get somebody to opt in once, we'd ask, do you want to opt into a newsletter? Do you want to opt into the club? Do you want to opt into hearing about the club and its commercial partners? So invariably, people just tick the first box and never the other 2. And as a business, we're challenged on collecting data for our commercial partners. So what we did was we stripped back our opt-in as a result of GDPR and moved to a single opt-in, which encompasses our partner data and the club. So what we have seen is a marginal decline in what we would previously call first-party opt-in, so the amount of people that want to hear from the club, but a massive increase in the people that are then opting in to hear from our commercial partners, and obviously that helps us sell a better story of the amount of fans we can engage in directly. So ultimately, and also when we implemented that, GDPR had come in. So what you're dealing with now are consumers are much more aware of their rights as individuals and their right to be forgotten. So effectively, you could argue, would we have seen that drop off anyway with all the publicity around GDPR? I mean, it's one of those things you'll never know with hindsight, but we're seeing much stronger engagement. We're seeing a much more open relationship with our fan base. And actually, what we found is we produced a bit of content with one of our players. He's no longer with us, Jack Wilshere, but getting a player to talk about GDPR is really interesting. But
What did he say?
well, anyone that knows Jack Wilshere, it was like very monotoned. Yeah, you know, it's important you tick this box if you want to hear from the club. You know, but it worked, and just being brutally honest with people. And one of the things that I'd like to see us do actually is be even more honest and just talk to the fans around actually the opportunities if you do opt in, and we can use your information on behalf of engaging with our sponsors. That helps drive revenue into the club, which then helps us buy better players, helps the team perform better. And actually, if you're having a really open and honest relationship, then people will buy into that journey and you bring them along with you. So we're slightly different in that actually by our fans giving us their data, they're actually helping put players on the pitch, which is an interesting concept.
So we didn't really actually see any changes to our list, but I think what you're touching on in terms of the consumer trust side of the GDPR is something that as marketers we all need to be aware of. We're not trying to trick people into getting onto our list. There's kind of potentially, hopefully, a benefit for customers to join our lists, and we should be able to communicate that. And if we can't, maybe we need to revisit actually what we're doing.
So actually, GDPR has helped you guys with your marketing strategy, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think definitely.
It's definitely made your team more visible in the organisation because suddenly when you put a number on a fine and then you look at what's happened with, I think in France, where they're going after a 50 million euro fine for, is it Google? I think it is.
Google, yeah.
You know, that's going to be interesting. That grabs attention. So suddenly they want to come and talk to you about what you're up to, and it's got a bit more focus in the organisation, which is good because then it makes it a lot easier to try and hammer home best practice. Because I think I've talked about it before, but a football club, we're a series of number of different businesses. So if I talk to my head of retail, I just want to get as many eyeballs on this as possible. But now we can also use GDPR to actually influence a better behaviour within our internal stakeholders, which again drives better engagement and it helps support the building of our strategy.
You mentioned the Google 50 million euro fine. Do you think that's just they're being set as an example? Do you think we'll see more? Are you guys worried about this type of thing?
I don't feel particularly worried about fines in terms of GDPR. The legislative bodies have been very clear that they're going to be working primarily with organisations to make sure that they comply with the law first and foremost. 50 million for Google is kind of nothing, so it's sort of meaningless in the grand scheme of things. I think what's more potentially significant is, so there's a recent study, recent white paper released by the DCMS on what they were calling fake news and looking into kind of data practices by Cambridge Analytica and that sort of thing. And I think that potentially is going to be more impactful in terms of the public kind of perception of data compared to kind of these big fines.
What do you think it does with consumer trust? Do you think it improves the relationship?
I think you need to educate the consumers because, you know, we live and breathe GDPR, and I guess if you asked everyone in this room, they'd have a slightly different take on what does it mean. So I think it's just important that it's about being open and honest with people, you know. We want your data because we want to give you a better experience with the club. You know, the more information you give us, the more that we can personalise that and stop putting irrelevant content in front of you. And we already heard about it earlier around, you know, building out those experiences. So I think that builds the trust and making sure that not only it's not about just disengaging from our content, but it's around us finding out why people are giving us their data and then turning off from our brand. Is it, you know, some of the information that we're sending out, is it not being that relevant? But also it's about building out that data profile as well. So I think, you know, it can only be good if you follow it in the right way. And it's a massive opportunity for brands. And I think to Jacques' point around the commissioner, I know in the UK, their focus is the same. We're not here to hinder business. We're here to put a structure around data, because data is all-encompassing now. It's on every touch point. We were talking about going up in the mountains and tracking what we're doing. That's going on a website somewhere. So it's, everyone just needs to be aware of what their data, where it's going and the value it has attached to it.
I think actually that's something that people now sort of are starting to understand, that they have these online profiles that are sitting across multiple kind of businesses and multiple places online, and there's a certain degree of trust now in terms of who they're willing to do business with. Because sure, I could sign up to a random website and who knows where that's going to go. I think we see various kind of high-profile data breaches that are happening. So there's, I think one happened recently with over a billion kind of email addresses and passwords, and these sort of things are high risk. And as a company, we also then have to be very careful about what we collect and how we store it, because suddenly we're kind of going to become a target for these things.
Have you changed anything based on that? Or are you just looking at it?
So I'm being quite careful. I think it's just operationally, making sure that everyone understands the value of what we have. And so they're, basic things like lock your PC and don't share Excel files with kind of plain text, kind of anything that shouldn't be there. Just general best practices. And I think actually GDPR did quite well in making sure that some of that was enshrined within law. So I think we're moving towards the right steps.
And as you mentioned, just all of the data that's being collected and all of our devices, do you think that it's kind of empowering consumers to be more in control and have more knowledge about their information, and then sort of set the relationship up for what they're willing to give and what they expect from you? And then how, as a brand, do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think so. Consumers, we do. We use a social sign-on, single sign-on platform, and we haven't started using it yet, but we'll start doing progressive profiling. So rather than ask a load of questions up front, we'll just build out that profile over time. We use a online. We track every aspect of our digital estate, and that feeds back into a view of that customer. So it's also not necessarily asking the consumer to give us all that information. We just let them know that we can track that information, which lends to itself to a bigger experience. So people are more than aware of that, and more, there is always a rise in queries, surprisingly, when the team is doing badly. So people have been using GDPR as a way to take their frustration out in the club, but we don't see a massive amount of complaints. I mean, we're a brand, they are fans, and they want to hear from the club, so we're very lucky in that aspect. It's not like we're actively always selling. A lot of what we put out there is content about the team, etc. So we don't get as many complaints as, say, maybe a brand that's pushing out a lot of acquisition. But we still get, maybe 10 to 20 requests. A lot of them subject access requests. And so we have to explain why we have their information. And actually, the most painful part is the data. Well, we don't have to do a lot of data portability. Again, we're lucky. Not many people are going to go, actually, can you give my data to Tottenham, or can you give my data to Barcelona? So we don't have to worry about that. But again, in some industries, especially telco, if you want to go from Vodafone to O2 or something, I'm sure you can ask for your data to be transferred. So, that's more problematic for those businesses. But we've put a lot of structure around our data, so that it enables us to react in an appropriate time frame. So we hope that builds better relationship with the fans.
Yeah, I think just carrying on with that, I think it's just all about trust. I do notice, as both a marketer and a consumer, that certain businesses will try to bend that degree of trust with me. So, for example, I've been talking to a large retailer recently who have been sticking things in their emails that potentially they shouldn't, because they don't tell me that they do this. So they're using double-click tracking. They're using Facebook link trackers within every single link for their email. So I've asked them to stop. Of course, they can't, because they can't personalize on a per-user basis. And then also, so one thing that I've been kind of thinking out loud to myself recently is email open and click tracking. How many people here tell consumers that they do this within their privacy policy? not many hands, but you're all sending email and tracking. And then, so if someone objected to that tracking, what do you have in place to deal with that? Do you unsubscribe, or can you actually turn that tracking off per user? And in most scenarios, the reality is, no, you can't. So that's something that as an industry, we still haven't kind of figured a way around. So I think we've got a long way to go, but we're getting there.
And I also think it's opened the doors for us because, again, legitimate interest comes into play. So I don't know if people here are using legitimate interest, but obviously it's very clear around if somebody's buying a product from you, you don't necessarily need an opt-in to carry on communicating. So if you're a retail brand, you don't need to get them to opt in. So if you've got a guest checkout facility, what we've done is we offer an opt out because they're buying that product. You then have a right to talk to them about similar goods and services without a marketing opt in. And I think that's misunderstood across industry as well. So it makes it more challenging around not confusing the user when you're signing them up. Do you offer an opt-in, and when they don't opt in, do you offer them opt-out because they're buying a good? You can't do that. So you have to work it out. But, we're moving our retail team, our hospitality team, they're all moving towards the use of legitimate interest because, again, being conservative, we're probably under-marketing to people. And I think there's a lot of confusion out there between GDPR and what legitimate interest provides. So, yeah, that's also an area of interest, which is great. I mean, we have situations, for example, and I sit there with my legal team and I argue with my legal team probably every 2 weeks on this because we sell membership, and that membership then entitles you to buy a ticket to a game. So the legitimate interest is they're buying a service to buy a ticket. If they're not opted into marketing, they're not being told when the tickets are available. So they don't then get alerted, so they don't buy the tickets. At the end of the year, they go, I don't want to renew my membership because I'm not getting any tickets. But legal is saying, well, they need to be opted in. And I'm like, well, it's, I'm not actually doing my job if I'm not telling them when they can use the membership that they've just paid for. So, there's some healthy debate that goes on in that area and how we can work that out. But that's definitely an area that gets more focused now as consumers, because when consumers think, oh, I don't want to be marketed to, but I do want to hear about when the games are, and I think there's a bit of confusion there in their minds. And so, again, you just have to work hard at nurturing that relationship. We also do a lot of reactivations, and re-engagement activity. All of those programs to try and keep consumers informed around what they should be telling us, giving us permission to do.
I've actually completely forgotten what I was about to say there. That's not great.
Well, what advice would you give to people in the room who maybe aren't totally compliant yet but are trying to get there?
Work on it. It's a process. You're not going to be hit with a £20 million fine. Just work on it. Be aware that there are shortcomings and that they need to be overcome. You'll probably have a competitive advantage if you do. I think as consumers become more aware of legislation, they will seek to work with retailers or seek to purchase from retailers that actually follow the law and are honest and open about what they're doing and how they're collecting data.
The ICO in the UK were quite clear in some of the talks I've been to, which is no company is ever going to be 100% compliant. You're always going to be moving towards compliance because of just the way it's quite a general, I suppose, policy, which is trying to be all-encompassing. So by default, with what was negotiated, you're never going to be able to reach that. But it's about proving that you are moving towards it. And again, it's about acting responsibly. And if you're doing that, then you'll be fine. But if you're not, or you're on the other side and you know that you've got bad practices and you're not doing anything about it, then that's going to be the challenge. But, watch that space. It'd be interesting to see what happens with that Google fine, because I imagine if they've been doing it in France, they've been doing it all over Europe. And if, suddenly they pay France, are they going to then have to pay all of the other member states as well? Because I'm sure that data protection policy is for the whole of the European Union. So it'll be interesting to see how that falls out. But then you're seeing some other fines of lost kind of data keys. I think Heathrow lost a data key. It only had information on 50 employees, and I think they got fined £100,000 pre-GDPR. So it'll be interesting. And, what lawyers love is case law. Until they've got case law, they're probably going to be acting on the side of caution. Once they've got some case law to know about, then I think it'll become a bit more clearer around the boundaries within which we can operate to drive a compliance.
I'd like to open up to questions. Anybody in the audience? Questions for these guys? There we go.
Hi, I'm Radu from Travian Games Munich. I have a question regarding how do you use the data you collect from email on the other channels. So we all know what GDPR means in terms of email, but for example, Facebook custom audience or Google or Twitter campaign, this is pretty much a gray zone, I would say.
It is. Obviously, what you can do on Facebook has changed as a result of GDPR and also the Cambridge Analytica thing. Again, I think the Cambridge Analytica thing is quite bad because it's always used as a bad example, and people always go, "Oh, but that's Cambridge Analytica," and it's like that's not anything like Cambridge Analytica. They were getting data that they didn't have a right, and they were mining for it. But where we use the social audiences is we can only load our opted-in data into Facebook. So Facebook changed it before you could go after similar audiences. It's a bit weird, our relationship with, or what Facebook tell you. So they tell you you can only go after people that are opted into your brand on their platform. And I argue with them, well, it's your platform. If they've opted in on your platform, surely then I can talk to them if I know that they like the club. But they've gone very conservative on that. But then they don't mind you they will help you find like-minded audiences. So I think it's still a bit confused around how they operate. So I can't talk to people I know that are on my database that aren't opted in to me, but I can use Facebook to go after people that aren't opted into me. So I think that is very confused. But we take all our data and drive multi-channel strategies. So it's, through our platform, we just moved on to Cheetah. We do email, SMS, we're looking at push notifications. We use another platform called Thunderhead, which allows us to do digital personalisation. So again, we take that data and it all sits within our single view, and it's all in our privacy policy, which we review on a regular basis with our team. I think, so I hope that answers your question, but that's how we tie all that data together. But obviously, like anything, and we've heard it earlier, you've never got enough resource to look at all the data that's being collected. So it's around picking your battles and knowing which ones are going to drive the best value into the club.
I think so long as you talk about it, the usage you want to do within your privacy policy, you have a good reason for using it, so presumably legitimate interest, I think it's completely fine. I don't think you need explicit kind of an opt-in consent to remarket to people through Facebook custom audiences. You just need legitimate interest.